Hello, my name is Lesley, and this is a new pace. So, today I want to talk to you about making art without a plan and what that can mean for you, and how that can really benefit your well-being, and how it can really have an impact on different areas of your life. So, first of all, just to set the context, as an art therapist and some of my own personal experiences as an artist myself, and back when I was an art teacher, I have often found that people would kind of come to me and say, I don't know where to start. I'm not sure what to do. Or I'm worried about whether I'm going to get it right and make a mistake or make something that isn't um, good enough or doesn't fulfill my plans and my intentions. And people might feel quite overwhelmed by that. And as a result of that, they might struggle to get started. And there's a difference between the education system, where there is much more structure and a plan given by the teacher and instructions as to how to start, compared to yourself as an artist making those own personal choices, or going to art therapy and being in that place where you're invited to express yourself. And I've seen this in all sorts of different ways. So you're not alone if you're in the position where you're thinking, well, I'd like to create something, but I'm not sure where to start. Or I'd like to create something and I'm worried that things might not go the way that I hoped, or might not go in a way that aligns with my idea of what good art would be and what expressing myself would be. And so there's lots of those fears, I would say, and those kind of things that might cause a delay, a sense of worry about how to start, are often resolved when you allow yourself to make a piece of art, do something without a plan. And it may seem counterintuitive, because some of the people that I speak with have an intention to create something, and they might have something in mind that they want to create. Like they might want to make a portrait, or they might want to make a landscape, or they might want to express maybe something, some symbols and some ideas, or sometimes people might have an image in mind that they want to create, but then might get so fixated on the end result that they struggle to make a start. So one of the things that can help people to start is giving yourself permission, really, to make out without a plan. And in the way that I think about this is goes back to some of the theory and some of the concepts of art therapy that I learned sort of a good 10 years ago. This idea of directive and non-art directive art therapy. And with there being directive, there being a theme or an idea or a sense of structure given to a client, given to the person that I'm working with, compared to the opposite end, which is non-directive, where there might not be a theme at all. It might be completely free. And actually, both of those sides can be a real contrast to each other, a real contrast of directive and non-directive. However, what really happens is that there's all of the things in between. It might be that somebody is given some structure and a starting point, but then freedom within that space. So it might be that the instructions or the structure could be to create something about themselves. And that's a starting point. However, actually it's an open-ended starting point, because it can include lots of different things. It can include lots of ideas, but that can be quite relieving for somebody who requires a lot of structure. And for some people, that might not be enough structure. They might want to be able to do a bit more planning. So actually, being able to let somebody feel that they can tolerate not knowing what it's going to look like, and they can tolerate that frustration, is maybe where that uncertainty comes from, and where that the freedom versus fear of not having a plan, of a non-directive activity, is maybe two sides of the same coin, really, of we're going for something without a plan. And in some ways it can feel really freeing and exciting and liberating. In other ways it can feel really overwhelming. So with that in mind, I would be maybe thinking, well, let's maybe start with something, a material that you are familiar with. So it could be that somebody's maybe familiar with pencil crayons, or with paint, or with oil pastels, but perhaps not chalk pastels. So they might start there and evolve into something new, into something that that becomes something different. So starting with something familiar, either a material that's familiar or an idea that's familiar, can bridge that gap between doing something completely non-directive where there's so much choice that it's overwhelming and maybe might not feel safe, in fact, for somebody, compared to having a huge amount of direction and restriction, that can also feel unhelpful as well. And for some people it might feel safe to give them a sense of an instruction and a purpose and a meaning of, like, we're going to do this task. However, because that's what people are really used to. That people are used to doing art in education, where they might have the teacher telling them what to do, what their project is and what their theme is, and knowing what they have to do from start to finish. Like, all of those steps are mapped out, generally speaking. So stepping into a new way of working, stepping into a new pace, shall we say, is very, very different and can feel like really challenging for many people, which is why having an art therapist to work with, rather than setting about this by yourself, can be really, really essential. And as you know, art therapy is a really important mental health treatment, and there's so many benefits of art therapy, which we can do so many different topics about. But the key thing with this is that idea of being able to start something without a plan. So what I would encourage, if you are thinking about this and looking into this, is for you to be able to just set the frame for you to say, well, I'm making something without a plan, and I'm going to allow whatever happens with my picture to happen. And for you to let go of that association of the quality of the artwork to have a certain meaning, to maybe mean something about yourself, or mean something about the world, or mean something about art in itself, or your art. So actually, it's taking away that ownership and the pedestal of that piece of art. And sometimes when someone's making a piece of art, it can feel very precious and it can feel very important. And I totally understand that, because art's such an important thing for me as well. However, when and when you're making art, especially, and I see this a lot as artists, and within myself as an artist, is that when you're making art, you often pour a lot of you into the art. So actually, there's a desire to make it align with you. And there might be times when you look at a piece of art as you're making it, or even at the start when you're not sure and you're looking at it and you're thinking, well, I'm not sure what's happening with this. I'm not sure where it's going. And allowing yourself for that just to exist, for you to be able to just observe that feeling and notice, well, I don't know what's happening with this. I'm not sure. I maybe feel a bit frustrated that I don't have a plan, but I'm going to go with the flow with this and see what happens and allow whatever to happen. So one thing that somebody might do is start with maybe with a pen or pencil and be quite tentative and quite cautious about what they're doing. They might be thinking, well, I want to draw a certain thing and be cautious. But then doing something maybe, and this is maybe a bit of a directive activity as well, like directing somebody to make art without a plan is in some ways a directive focus. Like, I'm going to direct you, I'm going to instruct you, I'm going to provide you the instruction to make art without a plan. So, for instance, here we go, we're going to make a scribble and see what happens to it. And actually, that in itself can feel like there's an uncertainty to it. And there's maybe, I didn't know how it was going to look. So I didn't have a particular shape to draw or idea of what I was going to be making. However, I'm setting the intention that I can scribble and it be okay, that there's not really a plan with that. But then in that self, what might happen, I think it's very different depending on what materials you use. So with a pen like this can often develop into something, it can develop into something else. We can often have a piece of art that starts one way and completely develops into a new way. Like you might be inspired to add paint, or you might be drawn to maybe add designs and patterns and emphasize this. You might even be inspired to take this off the paper, make a new piece of art off the paper in 3 dimensions, 3D, like a sculpture, like a model that would be maybe out of pipe cleaners, or maybe out of straw, or maybe out of wire, or maybe out of sticks and trees and branches and things like that, that you could then take into that. And something that started off simply as a scribble that might feel in that first sense of leading nowhere, maybe not starting with any particular plan, can end up evolving into something more. So one of the reasons why different materials matter in this context is that different materials have different properties. So if you were using pencil crayons, for instance, that would have a certain sense of control. So a pencil crayon mark on a piece of paper can be quite a sharp line or quite a soft line, depending on how well sharpened your pencil crayon is. But it's a dry material. And same with like an oil pastel will be a dry material as well. So it wouldn't be runny, but you can smudge it. So you can smudge an oil pastel. And then if you chose to use a soft pastel, that smudges even more. And then the same idea comes when you're using paint. So if you were using some paints that were very, very runny, for instance, very, very watery poster paints or acrylic paints, water-based things where you've added lots of water to it, or you've chosen to use watercolors where you've used a lot of water, then what you might find is that the paint then drips, and that can feel really freeing and fun to do at the same time as just catching the right amount, getting that Goldilocks moment of when you're playing with art materials and maybe a bit of paint's dripping, and at first it might feel like interesting, you might allow it to drip, and then it might feel too much, and then it might feel that you can control it in some way, and then it might feel like that you've maybe used a paper towel or something like that to blot out the paint, and then it might feel too little. So you might want to bring more back into it. So there's something really about when I'm talking about directive and non-directive art, there's something here about the choices that you make when you've started. So making a start with maybe some materials in mind. Could be, sometimes I've known people just pick, like we've got a pot of crayons here, close my eyes and then just pick something out. So I've got a chalk pastel there. We've actually got a mixture of chalks and oil pastels here. And this can come into here. And because I've chosen to use that just picking randomly, that's taken away the decision making process for me, having to think, do I want it to be smudgy or do I want it to be more solid? Do I want it to be paint that runs or do I want it to be like more controlled paints? So what I'm hearing myself talk about right now, what you might notice is that there are so many decisions and options and combinations of things when it comes to your art making, that actually allowing yourself to not be restricted by the outcome and limited by a plan can be really, really powerful when it comes to your well-being, when it comes to your mental health, and can be a really good way of practicing doing things that can feel uncertain, that can feel out of your comfort zone. So an example of this is if you were to be experiencing anxiety in any sort of way, maybe generalized anxiety or like some like different fears, different emotions in your body, and maybe wanting to keep things safe for you, then allowing yourself to use art in different ways can be a way of giving your nervous system and giving your mind proof that you can do tricky things, that you can do hard things, that if, say, you did a piece of art and we planned on colouring and then we went out of the line, then it's okay to do that. Like it might be that, like practicing, I'm just going to intentionally colour out of the line on purpose, just for the exercise of colouring out the line. For some people, that could just be way out of their comfort zone. For other people, they might be saying, yeah, sure, that's easy. I can easily colour out the line. However, when they were maybe having an intention of, right, I want to really try and strive to make this line perfect, or make this line really neat and like a curve that feels even. And then when that doesn't go according to plan, that can be somewhat frustrating for somebody. So actually there's an essence of toleration of that frustration, distress tolerance. And distress tolerance is talked about in a lot of mental health interventions, a lot of mental health support. And when it comes to those things of certain things that you're maybe needing to tolerate with your artwork, that in the real world, shall we say, they might have bigger implications. They might feel like that they matter more. Whereas if you can allow yourself to do it in the context of like your sketchbook, your artwork, and it be okay to colour out the line, or it be okay to start off drawing a sunset, painting a sunset, and then it's changing. Maybe the colours didn't go as you expected. Maybe the colours were more intense than you thought. And then maybe like you wanted to change it or ended up changing it and then went, oh, never mind, I'm just going to do something else. And then like what comes with that is that maybe a frustration of that bit in the middle where maybe it doesn't go according to plan, and then you're needing to either abandon it, which could feel very extreme, or adapt and refine it. So sometimes people can make something and then it goes, oh, it's just gone into something completely different, feels really messy, feels really unaligned to where I'm at. And then the next day when they wake up or when they see their picture again, they might see different things into it and you can start to draw on top of it, for instance. So there's a piece of art that I did recently that was just like that, where I started off making a landscape and then it changed dramatically. So I will talk you through that. So I was using watercolors and I didn't really have a plan, but as soon as I started using orange watercolors, and then I thought, oh, this could feel like a sunset. Quite like the idea of this being a sunset for me. And then what I noticed was that the amount of water I was using compared to the amount of paint didn't really match where I was at, what I wanted to do. And so actually I then added thicker paint to this and painted out a sunset, painted out that shape, and an orange really stuck out, and then painted in some sky and a bit of sea. And actually by this time I was thinking, well, maybe I'm not so worried about it looking like a landscape. I don't really mind what it looks like. I'm enjoying painting and in the process of painting. So I ended up just painting over the whole thing and moved my paintbrush around into little circles. And there was a moment where I thought, oh, actually, maybe I could have had more of a plan. Maybe I wish I had have taken my time more to go for this landscape, to go for this sunset. However, then actually, I just thought, no, you know what? Actually, this is probably what you needed to make something with thicker paint, something that feels more energizing, more about moving your hands around and moving different things around. So I was using like scratching with the end of the brush, and different marks came about onto it. And then I left it overnight. I left it thinking, oh, that's evolved into something, not really anything. It was nice to make a piece of art. It was just what I needed to regulate my nervous system, to feel where I am, set the scene, to have a good night's sleep. And then I woke up the next morning and decided that I really liked some of the shapes. So in this image that I'm holding up here, if you're watching this as a video, you will probably see like there's loads of different shapes and patterns and designs. When I woke up, it didn't have all the colour onto it. It had some colour, but not as bright as this. And then I chose to add brighter colours, to add some oil pastels, to add some marker pens, to really lift these colours up, because that's what I was inspired to do. My intuition told me that it would be worth doing. It would feel like more aligned to me if I was to add some colour to it. Just felt like that, drawn to it. And actually when I look back at the process, there's some times in that moment where I could have abandoned the artwork altogether. So I could have stopped when I realised that the sunset wasn't really working as a sunset as I'd hoped. I could have stopped when the paint got too thick and just felt too out of control. And when I'd chosen not to really mix colours, then it was maybe when I was starting to question, should I be making art now when I maybe haven't set up a paint palette to mix my colours or anything like that? I could have stopped at any of those points. I could have then woken up this morning and just looked at it and not done anything with it. However, all of these stages and the decision to carry on with something and add to something compared to a decision to leave something like in its own right, all of those things are things that make the process of art making and your self-expression all the more richer, like that build up that sense of what it is that you're expressing and what part of you is being shown and being expressed and being noticed by you, being honored by you. So I think that when people have this, and without making assumptions so much, but I'd like to encourage you to reflect on this for yourself. When people have this idea of creating art and needing to have a plan, my perception of that is that it's because they are considering it as maybe making something to go on the wall, maybe making something that somebody else would see. However, when people choose to make art for themselves, purely for themselves, for the purpose of either activating and boosting their mood, regulating emotions, or simply exploring, expressing something within themselves or an experience in that moment, then they are more likely to be able to make art without plan, therefore use art to manage their emotions and manage and process trauma and other experiences, work through some of those, like those challenges, those blocks, for want of a better word, and those things that have maybe held them back before. So actually, then when I've looked at this afterwards, when I've created this, and I thought, maybe it's in my sketchbook, maybe that's the sort of thing that I could then go and like make something in a actual intentional way. So what I like love about this piece, what I'm reflecting on with this piece here, is the entanglement of it and the energy of it. And what I'm really drawn to right now, because this is just A4 in size, but what I'm really drawn to in like now, when I've got all these ups and downs and these meandering, tangled shapes, is to make something bigger, to make something that's expansive, to get like a big sheet of card or a big canvas and create something where I'm using my arms, where I'm perhaps using both arms, bilateral painting, drawing, and where it's making something with more intent, with a more intentional sense, rather than completely without a plan. So watch this space, because I am really drawn to develop that as a piece of my art. And that's something that I would encourage other people to do. So often it's starting without a plan and, doing those things where it can feel like really, really spontaneous, really random, really messy. That messy middle is often the point where it can feel too much. And then as you get past that and start to really make intentional choices. So there were times at the start of that art process where I was literally just picking any colour. And then towards the end, as I was picking out other colours and using different pens and using markers and like working on what I thought looked nice to me, that aesthetic appeal, when I was intentionally creating something that felt right for me, that is where it can feel that the spontaneity and the randomness and the lack of a plan can really make a difference. So when we talk about trusting the process, that's an example of what that might mean. And people often do say, trust the process. And it can be really hard to trust the process when you don't know how it's going to turn out. But then, and more often than not, you might make something that then doesn't look like something that you even like or enjoy, or that you even want to look at again. You might have pieces of art that you never want to see again, that you might want to throw away, or you might want to paint over or do something with, who knows. But or if that's an indication to make more art, I don't like this piece, but I'm going to make some more art. I'm going to maybe make some, if you make 10 pieces of art without a plan, and that develops into something that you can pursue further with more intentional plan, then that has been helpful. So this was maybe just like a bit of a reflection on this piece, this recent piece that I was making, as well as to invite you to lean into this as a concept and let go of that pressure to be perfect, and strive for building your skills, of course. And if you were to make art without a plan as to what it looks like, but with an intention of experimenting, then that's a very different thing to making art, having the plan and having the intention of making something that was absolutely needing to be a certain way. So if you are curious about wanting to use art therapeutically and you are not sure where to start, then I have lots of things available to help you with that, including courses, and I do offer one-to-one services as well, art therapy and confidence coaching, some of which is very much about creativity, some of it which gives you a much deeper dive in terms of art therapy and exploring your personal challenges and needs and experiences. So if this speaks to you, then reach out to me and ask me any questions that you've got, and let me know if there's any other topics or things that you want me to talk about. So thank you for listening, and speak to you soon. Bye bye.